Thanks everyone for joining our webinar on the Open Knowledge Institution book, which was produced in a book sprint and later published through community publishing platforms. Welcome everyone. So today we have a short agenda, like we will hear a lot about the process itself by the authors who joined us in this webinar. We'll also hear a little bit from the book sprint side, so what the process looked like. My name is Karina. I'm a book sprint facilitator, replacing Faith, who has been doing this really amazing project. And we have Catherine with us, who will talk about the publishing side of this book. And of course, as I said earlier, all the amazing authors. And maybe those who joined the webinar, you can use the chat, like down there, you should see a menu bar. There's a chat function. So anytime you want to raise a question, you can always use the chat function, and we'll make sure those questions are really also answered and picked up. You can also give any feedback. And if you want to let us know, maybe you can start writing in the chat just where you're dialing in from. So we can, and maybe a little bit about your background, so we can also see who's joining us here in the webinar. Catherine, can I also shortly, briefly hand over to you, just so you can also say a little bit about your background, because we're hosting this together.
Sure thing. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Catherine Ahearn. I am the head of content at the Knowledge Futures Group. I'm on the call today sort of representing both our participation as an organization in supporting this amazing title and all of these authors, but also the MIT Press, who we partnered with to stand up a program that they started for this book called Works in Progress, but has since supported some other books as well, and I'll go into all of that later. Very excited to hear from the authors and all of you, and for some conversation later on.
Okay, a book sprint. Let me briefly explain a little bit more about what a book sprint is and what process looks like. I'm going to share my screen for this. 1 second. Okay. And present. So, yeah, book sprint from zero to book. Basically, it sounds like a fairy tale, but yes, a book sprint is a process of collaborative knowledge creation where a group of 6 to 12 authors comes together and is guided through a process of collaborative writing. We at Book Sprints have been doing this for a decade now. Book Sprints has been founded by Adam Haidt, who originally comes from the open source software development. And then in this field, there was a big need for software documentation. So he said, actually, the people who write the code should also be the ones as they embody the knowledge to write it up. And he developed this method from agile methods from software development and transferred them to publishing. And yeah, this is the book sprint. And over the years, he's been building a whole team of copy editors, illustrators, and book designers and facilitators to his team. And together, we help groups of people to write together a book in 5 days. So we've been publishing a few also academic books. One of them is the book that we're going to talk about today, the Open Knowledge Institutions. So we've been helping the writing of books of more than 150 by now. And so we started with software manuals, but now we also facilitate the writing of marketing books, of academic pieces, of policy papers, of all different kinds of formats and topics. And then just really briefly about the process. So the main idea is that the process is very collaborative. So the outcome is not one book with a lot of chapters by different authors, but it is really one coherent message written with one unified voice. And to arrive at this, usually we come together with a group and we create consensus across the many perspectives that the people bring to the table, to then also map these different content pieces and find broader themes within them, to then map those themes onto sections, chapters, and sub-chapters, to then create sort of a reader journey and logical thread through this field of knowledge that we mapped, which then turns into a book structure. And once we have a structure, people really start writing very soon, because a lot of consensus building and decision making really happens through the writing, through the iterative writing itself. So people start in pairs or individually to draft chapters, outline chapters, and then each text really moves through several hands. And this is how we make sure that, the text is really a comprehensive piece. And then, as I said, there are lots of loops of iterative writing and revision. And this is how we, how the book actually comes together while being written. And we also have a team, a production team of, as I said it earlier, of copy editors, illustrators, and book designers who work in the same platform and a co-authoring tool that we use called Editoria. So while the group is writing, our production team is producing the book at the same time. And I talked to Faith, the facilitator of this book sprint, and she really said, I mean, the method and the process we provide and the services is one thing, but really important is the book sprint setting. And she really said it was the best case scenario of what could have happened. She said it was, for her, it was really like a journey into the wild and meeting all the authors who came from all over the world, who were very excited and committed to actually work with each other, and to spend this week together and really plunge into this adventure of writing this book together. And Lucy and Cameron, who did a really great job in taking leadership on the whole project, coming up with a really good concept. And then with the authors together on day one, they decided to write a manifesto and really kind of shake the field. So for Faith, this was a very amazing process. Also as a facilitator, this is what she's told me to tell you. And the setting and the place were amazing. And that really the people, and including herself, really felt catered for. I would also like one of the authors who cannot be with us, she sent us a video that I would like to share with you. Let me briefly stop and start the 1 second. I'm sharing my screen again. This is Katie, who's one of the authors of the book. And in her words, she describes the whole process of sprinting first and then going on a journey of community publishing. But let us listen to her. Okay.
Hi, my name is Katie Wilson. I'm a researcher with the Curtin Open Knowledge Initiative, where I focus on diversity in research workforces and research production, as well as access to academic libraries, all within the framework of open knowledge. And my background is in Indigenous education and academic libraries in Australia and Aotearoa, New Zealand. So I joined the Koki project in April 2018, and 3 weeks later we took off into the Western Australian Swan Valley to join 12 other authors in the book sprint. Some of us didn't know each other beforehand, we'd never met, but we all came together in this amazing experience. We were able to bring our skills and experiences and backgrounds into writing a book in 5 days, quite amazing. So the process started off with a broad kind of brainstorming and lots of yellow stickies in the first day, and then we broke into groups to work on writing up chapters. And the process was that each group would be followed by another group who would read and critique the chapter, and then another group. So that process ensured that there were multiple perspectives, but also that the writing made sense. And so this is what we did for 5 days, in between walks in the arid landscape and wonderful meals. And lo and behold, at the end of 5 days, with the help of Faith Bosworth and the rest of the Book Sprints team, Faith was the faithful facilitator and moderator, brought us all together. We produced a book, we were working right up until the last minute, pulling it all together into a single sort of flowing style, checking references, and then we took off back to the real world. And then MIT stepped up to publish the book, first made it available through the PubPub platform for open community research review, which was a very wonderful process. And then it went for traditional peer review. And then we incorporated all of the comments from the reviews into the final version, which has been published by MIT Press in both hard copy and also made available, thanks to the MIT libraries, as an open access book. And so that's my perspective. Thank you to all who made such an amazing experience happen.
Also thanks from my side and from Faith's side. Lucy and Cameron, we would really like to hear from you and also from the other authors that are here with us. One more thing I wanted to talk about that Faith told me. She said, in the beginning, you thought the book sprint would rather be something like a kickoff to get the authors together and get them motivated to then keep working forward, to keep further working with you. But that actually the book sprint already was more than you expected. So maybe from your experience, how was the whole process, not only the sprint, but also the journey of community publishing afterwards? Like, what were the challenges, but also what was the most rewarding thing about it? How was it from your perspective and experience?
So I'll go first. Yep. So for me, this was an idea. The book sprint concept is something I hadn't heard about until I started working with Cameron. And I think actually we applied for funding a couple of times before we actually got the funding to run this workshop. And I remember I think one of the biggest hurdles for us in pulling everything together at our end was trying to explain to our faculty and to our DVC of research what we meant by a facilitated workshop where we would write a book. And it just wasn't a concept that anyone could really understand. And we had really interesting questions like, well, can't you just facilitate it? What do you mean you need a special person to facilitate it? No, this is like a conference, isn't it? Or no, this is like, is it an unconference? There just wasn't a language that anyone could really understand. So I think for us, eventually we managed to just convince our DVC of research that this was going to be great and he should just let us try it. And he sort of sent us away without too much interest in what we were really doing. So that was our first hurdle. And I think actually it's been really fascinating because now our latest triumph with this book is that we've achieved what we hoped for in terms of creating something that we could bring back to the university that would help to shape the way our university thinks about diversity and equity and inclusion and openness. And last week, the same DVC of research was going around and triumphantly making compulsory reading the chapter on diversity. And, he actually thinks it was a great idea. And he totally, I think, thinks maybe he came up with the book sprint concept himself. So for us, that's been a huge journey that we've been on with our own institution in terms of talking to them about ways that we can create knowledge together. And it's been really successful. And I guess the other, just from a nuts and bolts perspective, it's been an enormously fun experience being involved with this book. It was a dream come true to be able to invite people that we really wanted to work with to come and to be locked away for a week with us in the middle of nowhere, and to have a whole week of everyone's attention, and to be able to really not just hang around with people, but to really create something with people that we respect and admire. And for me, as someone who had previously sort of been locked in a room for 2 years writing a traditional academic book, this was, you know, just an infinitely more fun and creative and joyful experience. And I think really, if I have a choice, I never want to go back to the old way of writing books. I really think this is a much nicer way of building a community and being part of a community and creating knowledge, and recognizing that that's something that happens in groups really well, and that actually together we have ideas that are more than we could individually have. So I think that was my other big takeaway. And finally, the other thing I just wanted to say is I think the experience has changed my confidence level when it comes to writing and collaborating with other people. And I think it's really easy to forget the shift that we've all made in just a few years from working on our own Word documents and emailing documents to each other and waiting for someone else to do their writing, and then, you know, maybe waiting until we finish something before we send it off. And now we're all working in a Google Docs kind of space. And so being forced to get comfortable with collaborative writing very quickly, I think has been something that's been really useful and valuable. And I think has really changed certainly the level of self-consciousness I feel when we have to work quickly and we just need to spit things out, and we need to, you know, edit each other's work, and we now need to work as a team, and off we go. And I think the book sprint was just from that writing experience point of view, actually really brilliant. And I would definitely recommend other people give it a go. So that was.
I guess, but if I jump in and go back right to the beginning of the project, the project Curtin Open Knowledge Initiative grew out of a conversation and different perspectives that Lucy and I had around what it was to take forward an agenda about openness in universities. What we shared was this idea that there was something particular about universities and their intersection with open knowledge and an opportunity for something different. And Chris Morano, Deputy Vice Chancellor of Research at the beginning, I think he was a new DVCR, he was looking for things to take a punt on, and we were interesting enough to humour, to try out something new and different. I think for us, and certainly for me, the purpose of the book sprint, we had this idea. We really had 3 words: open knowledge institutions. And we thought there was something there. We didn't know what it was. And so the idea that we could, as Lucy said, bring this group of amazing people together, deliberately in an open-ended space, to see what came out of that concept, to see what grew out of it, without much in the way of presuppositions around what it would mean or how it would work. And yeah, the product of those 5 days, you know, aside from introducing some people to kangaroos for the first time, and having a wonderful space. I mean, it sounds like a trivial thing, but we had various people amongst the authors who had quite specific dietary requirements. And I'm sure everyone on the call has been to those workshops and conferences where those dietary requirements are dealt with in a somewhat perfunctory manner, if I may say. But our hosts at Moondine had everything completely covered. There was the gluten-free option, the vegetarian option, the vegan option, and there wasn't any sense that they were different from each other. And that, just the food itself was an incredible part of that process. And I think, again, something that various of us remember. So we came out of these 5 days with a book, right, with a not just a set of words, but actually a formatted document that we could then take around, and we were excited about it. And so was Amy Brand at MIT Press, who got in touch and said, you know, would you be interested in going through a process of community review? And again, we wanted to take an open approach. This was a document about openness. So how can we engage a broader community than the 15 of us who had worked on it, to engage with it and improve it? And so that process was an interesting one. We were sort of a mixture of active and passive soliciting of comments, and whether we could get people to, you know, where we got people to comment was an interesting challenge in some ways. As with many of these systems, it's not always easy to get people to comment on the platforms, but we also were able to use that to get a lot of feedback in. And then, and hold my hands up, I'm not exactly a fan of traditional peer review, but I will say that the reviewers we had, who remained anonymous, had some really quite helpful views about how we could improve and sharpen up the book. And I guess this takes us out of the traditional book sprints approach, right? So we moved away from that finished object and sought to revise it. And revise it still with the spirit of all 15 of us being involved. And that was a bit of a challenge. So responding to referees' comments while trying to keep everyone's voice, everyone's thoughts in the loop. That wasn't always easy. But to the extent we succeeded, I think the book is sharper, better formed for having been through that process. And now it is, yeah, it's open access, thanks to the efforts of MIT Press, and we're really looking forward to the response and how it changes things. And I think, as Lucy said, we're already seeing some sense that it is changing. And for us, it's what was the experiment, what was speculative, what we were terrified was going to fall flat in its face, has become so central in so many ways to the entirety of what we're doing, from framing the sort of big theoretical frameworks to being the touchstone we keep going back to check whether we're still on track. It was a really powerful experience, and a really formative process for all of the work we're doing.
There was a question from the participants of the webinar. I want to read it. I would like to ask a question to Lucy. What has happened to the community of writers and reviewers since the book sprint? There's one. And I would like to add one more for Cameron, because you talked about the peer reviews and the whole reviewing process a lot. Was there any totally unexpected process happening afterwards? Like, what was it as you expected, or did the book take a total turn afterwards, maybe? Those two questions. And then after that, also, of course, we have Catherine here and Carl, who also have been participants in the book sprint. Also handing over to you later. Okay, thank you.
Right. So in terms of what's happened to our community of writers, well, some of us are still working together every day. So Carl, Cameron, and Katie Wilson, who we heard from, are all part of a project that's still going. And so we're co-authoring regularly and publishing. But we also have been, we've been consciously cultivating a community that I think has grown from and still includes a lot of the members of the original book sprint, and some of those members we're working with more closely than others. But we've also, got now an entire project which is really focused around thinking through knowledge making as a community, and we have regular community calls, and we are thinking really hard about how we sort of build, I guess, on the sense of community that we were able to create during the book sprint. So that's still an active, ongoing, everyday living community for us. It's not something that we finished and then have left behind.
Yeah,
and
so
then I guess
in terms of a radical shift, no. I think, again, this was part of the challenge. Was there are still things that I would probably change if I was the only author, but I wasn't the only author, and there were, it was a product of a group, and we felt it was really important to hold to that. The book did change. I mean, you can look at the changes on the Book in Progress platform versus the open access final version. And some of those changes involved a lot more case studies. So we got a lot more specific. Again, that was one of the things that the anonymous referees raised, wanting more concrete examples. And I think we also strengthened and deepened some of the theoretical framework, which was a natural consequence. Again, in 5 days, you don't think through all the consequences. And we had another year to think through some of those. And I think that helped. So we consciously didn't radically change the book. And we tried instead to deepen it. But there is a tension there in terms of the processes of the book sprint, the processes of a traditional scholarly book publishing process. But I think they can be made to work together in that sense.
Learning how to leave voices in rather than to just take them out was actually one of the things I think I learned to take much more seriously as part of the book sprint writing process. And I, during the final editing, actually was wanting, I'm normally pretty happy with my red pen. And one of the other more experienced authors in the group was saying, no, one of the things you're trying to learn is how to include diverse perspectives in a book that we've written together. And that's actually hard if you're used to being a sole author of things. Yeah. I can see Eve Gray also. So yes, we can hear you. And Eve is one of the people who flew over from Africa. She flew all the way from South Africa to take part in the book sprint. So it's nice that you can join us.
I'm very pleased to join you, and I'd like to add a bit towards the end about what we might offer in exchange between our departments.
I also ask, I also see Catherine and Carl, also for you, what were the process has been quite a while ago now. What is standing out for you? What kind of impact did the book have for you personally, but also for your work life, for the institutions you work with? So yeah, maybe that question, what kind of impact did the book and the whole process leave on you?
I would say dramatic impact. And I'm an interdisciplinary scholar. So my PhD was from an interdisciplinary program in the US. And I have never, including in that program, I have never had the opportunity to actually collaborate with people from different disciplines. I brought different disciplines to bear on my own topics of research. But there's a big difference when you come together with, major economists and people who have, cultural studies backgrounds and librarians and, just this landscape of knowledge that no one person can hold. So it wasn't even just that there was a team writing this book and a really good team. It was also that it was a diverse team, both in terms of, geography, discipline, all kinds of characteristics. And so in some ways we certainly didn't do it perfectly. Nobody does this perfectly, but we tried to embody what we were writing in the team itself. And I thought that was maybe one of the more radical components of what we were doing in this book sprint. In terms of the impact on my work, there's not a day that goes by that I am not anchored by the work that we all did together. It gave me one of those rare time out of time moments where I really got to think about what I care about in terms of open knowledge and why I care about open knowledge and what it is that it can do. And I'm continuing to do a lot of work in that very specific space that I'm not sure I would have been able to undertake if I hadn't had that concentrated moment of time with others who could push my thinking, who could take it 16 steps further than I ever could. And to have the benefit of that collaboration was worth more than all the kangaroos that we came into contact with, or the gluten-free cake. Yeah, others.
Could I just comment on that? From our perspective in Africa, what you've said is hugely valuable. And I would love it to be spread further, and that discussion to go further, to empower the kind of people we work with, who, unlike you, aren't occupying posts of stature or, you know, any power, but can see it from the other end upwards. And it works that way very well as well.
Maybe the same question to you. What kind of impact did the book have on you, your personal and professional life?
Hi, I'm Carl. So I remember when I went to the book sprint, I have only just joined the Curtin team only after a short while, and I haven't written a book before that, and obviously not a book sprint. So it was really an eye-opening experience. You know, there was really a diverse group of people having different backgrounds and different ideas, and the book sprint kind of forced everybody to work together collaboratively. So that was really amazing for me. There was a lot of discussions and debates, and repeated editing, writing, rewriting, sometimes rewriting over other people's things. So a lot of coordination, communication going on. That was very interesting, very amazing. I think that's been able to be facilitated. And as Cameron, Lucy, and everyone else already mentioned, that it's amazing to have a long period of time, or an extended period of time, for everybody to be able to focus on one subject and to produce a book in that period. So that was really, really fun and great learning experience for me. And in terms of the impact for me, well, maybe for the Koki project, is that we wanted to change the stories that universities tell about themselves. In other words, we want to think about how we can reshape universities as a community and changing perhaps negative sentiments toward maybe current systems and into opportunities for bettering for the future. And in that essence, the book has built the foundation for a lot of the work that Koki is currently doing, in particular in terms of the research that we're doing and that I'm involved in. For example, we wrote papers about the influence of policies on open access uptake. We looked at diversity, took deep dive into gender diversity at institutional levels. And we also looked at exploring and understanding relationships between different facets of open knowledge institutions, through different proxies and indicators. So all of these stem from some of the discussions that has taken place in the book. So in that sense, it has really had a big impact on the continuation of work that we're doing.
Yuka, I just noticed we haven't talked about what the book in detail is about. So thank you for the summary, just for the ones who maybe joined the webinar not knowing so much about it. But yeah, that was the book, what the book was about. There was 2 more questions. One Lucy already picked up. So it was about the process of setting up the concept, or the authors, like the group and the division of labor before the sprint.
So I guess that's something that certainly I really didn't have a clear concept of before we started the sprint. And I remember being really surprised on the first day thinking, oh, you know, we'll have a nice morning of getting to know each other and doing some sticky notes, and off we go. Here we, you know, and I sort of settled in for a relaxing morning. And actually the facilitation, you know, really starts, and everyone is being made to work from the second the book sprint kicks off. And I think for a lot of us who are used to conferences or workshops being really managed and you know, very nicely and very skillfully guided through a process of saying, okay, our goal is not just to have a nice time, it is to produce a book. And in order to do this, what does it need? You know, and the process of deciding on the chapters, I thought it would be, you know, at least half a morning, but actually it seemed to take about 5 minutes, and then it was done. And then we were all sent off with our very small chunks that we all had to begin writing. And I found that, you know, that was really like, wow, a little bit of a shock, but also incredibly efficient. And the other, and the principle that everyone is writing the whole book together, that we're not splitting it up. We weren't just assigning chapters to individual authors. It wasn't an edited collection, but that we really were all, even though we were from incredibly different disciplines and backgrounds, we all had to actively work on each other's writing, write with each other, team up. You know, we could separate off if some of us knew more about one thing than another, then that, you know, led to a few different focused bits. But on the whole, the principle was that we were all writing together, not as individuals who were writing in the same space. And that was a very, very, as Catherine said, a really radical experience, but also I think a very, very powerful experience. And in part because we had we had such a diverse group, and we keep saying it, but for me, we had, for example, a vice chancellor of a university I'd previously worked at. Malcolm was on our team. We had some incredibly wonderful economists who were really from a very, very German tradition of economics that I had no familiarity with, and I would never have dared to think that I would co-author with either Malcolm or Carsten. That was just not a thing that would normally have been in my world. And the other thing for us, or for me, the other marvel of the facilitation process was watching Faith manage some of our more senior members of the author team who decided that they definitely didn't want to keep writing after dinner. They felt that it was not reasonable that they should be working so hard all the time, and they thought that they should just be able to have dinner and then maybe have some wine and a nap. And Faith said, no problem. And she moved dinner so that we all ate dinner much later. She just spoke to the kitchens and moved the dinner time, and then told them it was fine. They didn't have to keep writing after dinner time. And I just thought, you know, things like that, we were really under the pump, and we were being pushed to keep writing. And we were being sort of given the opportunity to collaborate across boundaries that I think most of us would never normally cross. And that was really, for me, quite amazing. Sorry, there was another question that I'm sure. But I think those practical aspects, for me, I get nervous about what that means, you know, when I'm signing up for, I suppose everyone does, before you sign up to go off to a week of intensive anything. I like to be able to understand, what am I signing up for? And even as one of the organizers, I really didn't understand this process until we did it. And I think for Carl, who had just joined our team, and been told, oh, hi, welcome, you know, you've got to come up with us on a week's, you know, intensive book sprint, 5 minutes after he joined. And for Eve, who came from South Africa, and Catherine, you know, we had people flying from all over the place, and I think they were actually quite brave. And I'm glad it worked out, but I would definitely recommend doing it again.
So I have a question sort of related to something that Catherine just said in the chat, which is, you know, it seems that picking the right people to come together was the ultimate strategic stroke of brilliance. And so I'm curious about how you came to that decision around who to invite. And, you know, I imagine it came from some kind of clarity about what you wanted to say, or what you thought you could lend to the topic. But I'm curious to hear more about how you pulled all those people together.
It was really hard. And it was a slow process because, so I had some experience of this. So I had, one of the things you get told very strongly is, you know, no more than 15. You know, and that was really, really hard because we had a much longer list. And even, you know, 15 was probably, is regarded, I guess, as at the top end of what's appropriate. We had people we wanted to work with, as Lucy mentioned, and we also had a sense of what kind of areas we wanted to cover. And I think in the end, that was more important. So we worked through networks and, you know, people who knew people, but we focused on the topic areas or the expertise and the experiences that we wanted to bring into the conversation, perhaps more so than the specific people themselves. And then we attempted to fill them, and we didn't actually fill all of the, you know, background areas that we'd hoped for. One example of that was that we'd really hoped to bring someone from an architecture perspective, because we thought that what the space and buildings and how open a building is seemed like a thing that was important, or a campus seemed like an issue that was important, and so we didn't have that expertise in the room at the time. But that was, and again, this was working, you know, with Faith and the Book Sprints team. That recommendation of, you know, think about your title, think about a subtitle, and then think about the experiences that you want to bring to bear and the background that you want to bring into the room to make it possible. And that was, and we were very lucky that people said yes, and that we had the resources to bring people together. Yeah, it was very much sort of the dream group. I think the other thing, I don't know whether we've explicitly said this, there was no one there who knew everyone else. None of the 15 authors knew all of the other authors. I think I knew the most, and I didn't know 5 of the people who were coming. So we also sort of tried to deliberately not just make it, you know, someone's friends.
And that made the evenings so much fun. I mean, we didn't have a ton. I mean, we were working. There was really not much time to do other than working. But we had a tea break in the morning that always included the best dessert kind of stuff imaginable. And it might have only been 15 minutes, but that was an important time where we could actually kind of talk about other things. Lunchtime was always a moment where we had, you know, at least a few minutes to get to know each other a little bit, and then ditto for dinner time. And the diversity of perspectives, you know, you already saw it in what we were writing on the topic, but then it was utterly fascinating to find out things about backgrounds of people and to start connecting with the humanness in these other ways over the course of the week that we spent together. It was awesome, everything about it.
I think at Book Sprints we always say, like, our process brings the best out of the people in the room, but you have to bring the right people into the room so we can do our job. And I think that once more, Cameron and Lucy, and also from Faith, you did an amazing job compiling this group of authors and writers together. There was also maybe there was a question on and how far that works virtual. Like, we've been talking a lot about the setting and coming together and being as a group. And we would swear before COVID, like, remote does not work at all. It cannot be done. But then we just had to do it within a month. And it works also virtually. And it's not the same intense group experience, but it is still a very intense collaboration. And actually it comes with pros and cons. Now that I go back on site after I've been working virtual for almost 2 years, I actually take a lot of things from the virtual setting back into the on-site. And I realize both have their pros and cons, and still setting up the space, combining the right group of people, getting skillful people who are also good humans, to work with. Yeah, this is something you have to address in both settings, both works. But yeah, what you experienced there, like as a group coming together in this one spot, is truly unique. So yeah, there was this question about the virtual book sprint. I just wanted to mention it briefly, but there was also the question, which Catherine can answer. So how did that work, coming from the sprint and then going into this journey and opening up the community publishing? So maybe let me hand over to you to give us a few details on that.
Thank you. Yeah, so I work at the Knowledge Futures Group, which is an independent nonprofit, but we'd originated within MIT. And so we had a close relationship with the MIT Press, which we still have, and had been working really closely with them on some of their books and journals. And then separately as a team, we, we're always supporting researchers, citizen scientists, basically really anyone who wanted to share their research openly, regardless of whether or not they were publishing with a big university press or something like that. And so we had kind of gotten looped into different stages of sharing information and ideas with different types of people. And this led us into conversations with the press about how we might be able to help them support their authors in engaging in more open processes, both with respect to open review, but even making manuscripts available sooner than they would normally be able to in print. And certainly, especially now, getting things out and available quickly is increasingly important in some fields. So we've done a lot of work there too. So when Amy Brand started talking to the authors about publishing this title for open review, we decided not only to put it on PubPub for that purpose, but also to kind of create a bit of a program for the press around it called Works in Progress. And the link I shared earlier was to the specific landing page within the Works in Progress community for this title, but you'll see a couple of others up there too. And I think 1 or 2 were kind of live right now and up there for community engagement. As a platform, we learned from everything that goes on PubPub, but this was really interesting because we're always trying to sort of enhance the platform and the technology in the service of the community and in moving the culture toward more openness and sharing. So, things like trying to encourage annotation and open review, where people are, as Cameron kind of alluded to earlier, more likely to shoot you an email. But we do think that there's value in other people seeing your feedback and learning from that feedback. And there's a lot there that is often kind of relegated to email and private channels. Sometimes that's appropriate, but I think sometimes we lose a lot there. So, we're still always sort of iterating and figuring out best practices for helping people to do that. So we worked on publishing the draft that came out of the book sprints process on there. I vividly remember a morning where I was downloading lots of pictures of penguins. I had penguins all over my desktop, which we were happily able to bring back for the final PubPub version too. And yeah, exactly, the penguin persists. And that was great. That, we were excited to work with such a big group of authors, because that usually does also help get the word out. As part of the program, the press doesn't necessarily sign the book yet, but it's a signal that they're supportive of the idea. They want to see people engaging with it. And they also put some budget behind helping marketing the open review process so that you have a wider reach and are able to get more feedback from lots of other people. And again, since this first instance of the Works in Progress program, we've sort of tweaked how that works, and we're constantly doing that. And then, you know, for the final version, we heard that it would be OA. I think the MIT libraries help support that as well, which we love. And right now that title is obviously available in print on MIT Press Direct as chapterized PDFs and on PubPub via HTML, but you can download it in different ways. And that version too is also, you can annotate on it, you can kind of foster a community around it. So we hope that engagement and that call for people to sort of be a part of the conversation doesn't necessarily close because it's been, you know, finally published or anything like that. I think I'll leave it there in case people have any questions.
Any questions? Just you can unmute yourselves and just ask a question or write in the chat. I see there was one question about when in a collaborative project, writing project, can you say it's finished? Well, we just heard that where there are probably rather phases of a document. If we say a book is a community of people involved, of content that is evolving, then maybe, oh, I have a good saying, I'm a book sprint facilitator. I have 5 days and then that's it. We own the process. And then, of course, the outcome of a book sprint. I mean, this is a very good example of how this can live on and how you can have versioning and reviewing and further, working with this content.
I think one of the things that's really struck me through this whole process, and I guess, you know, obviously we weren't the first to go through this kind of process necessarily, but the sense of the language being missing, the sense of the connection between these different processes, it's seemed to us that the opportunity for asking that question in different ways and answering it in different ways at different stages of the process, that, you know, in an ideal world, a piece of work is never finished. It continues to evolve. And yet publishing, you know, fixing the fixity of the codex, as my colleagues in the humanities and in book publishing like to say, is an important part of that conceptual framework of what it means to be published. And I think that's actually where a lot of them, there's lots of opportunity here to think about how making things less finished, making them available in slightly less finished forms encourages that development over time. And I think if there's anything to work on, it's that the book sprint approach emphasizes that you get this formatted, bound thing at the end of 5 days. And so how do we use that in part of a longer process remains a question.
Yeah, so I think though having the hard deadline was so powerful. Saying, no, we're going to get to the end of this week and we will have a book and you will be able to hold it in your hands. And you know, and then having a book that we could come back and give to people. So I was looking around just before this to see if I could find the original penguin covered beautiful book that we finished the book sprint with. But actually, you know, we had quite a few hundred copies printed and we gave all of them away. So they went out and we gave them away as review copies. We gave them away for people to give us feedback on. We got annotated versions of the book back with, you know, pens scribbled all over from, you know, senior leaders in the university who really, you know, had views on what we were doing and who took the time to give us the feedback. And I think a lot of that, you know, process was helped by the fact that we had something that was beautiful and something that people could touch and something that people had made in 5 days. So that was brilliant. But we also had some, you know, some tensions around, for example, the fact that an academic, if it's going to be an academic fully published book, it needs to do certain things, and you can't just not have references in because you wrote it in a hurry. That's not really a thing so much. And, you know, peer review and ensuring that you respond and having some kind of formal process that happens after the book sprint is really necessary. So I think that having those two processes coming together it's extra powerful in the academic writing space. But I think that the academic writing space is obviously a bit different from technical documentation and from some of the other genres where writing quickly and getting something done is brilliant. And I think even with academic writing, having a thing, not a perfect thing, is still just huge in a week.
With an eye to the clock, I wanted to draw attention to Anne's question, which is, would a book sprint facilitator ever be a standard job description in a research organization? And can you imagine that being some kind of role within a library? And I think it's an interesting idea in terms of how can knowledge institutions help facilitate this type of knowledge creation and dissemination, and if they should have more of a direct hand in this, aside from stamping your approval for funding to attend something like this. I'm wondering if any of the authors have something to say to that point.
I would say yes. I mean, I think we found elements of this process really powerful, and facilitation really critical. During the pandemic, having online meetings, workshops that are meaningful, it's hard. You need professionals, you need people who are really great at managing and directing and coordinating the production and dissemination knowledge. So, this skill set, the skill set that the facilitators bring, and the frameworks and the systems that can be applied to really help people get through something to a product quickly, I think it's really powerful. It's not very academic. It's not the way academics generally operate, but I've not seen it. I've seen it be very powerfully applied now a number of times. So I think it really is something that could be brought to bear.
I think having someone who came in from the outside, although I think that there are elements of the book sprint process that absolutely should be applied more widely inside universities, I also think that in our case, having someone coming in from the outside who wasn't frightened of some of our big personalities and who could just get on with the job, that made her, she wasn't scared of offending people and having to work with them next week. And and I think that's a powerful thing for some groups. I'm sure other groups are perfect, but ours was perfect too. We loved our group. It was just.
I guess, I mean, I am a facilitator at book sprints, and you all mentioned it. On the one side, we manage the workflow, delegate tasks, and at the other side, in the background, we kind of preempt any obstacles to collaboration. If this is difficult characters, this is part of the process, and they have, every character is part of the book writing and have their role to play. And often those who are very, dominant maybe are also the ones who can, bring up a lot of energy and push decisions. We just need to handle everyone in the room. Then maybe to also, I guess the skill set of facilitation and writing collaboratively, it should get in any working environment. And then, of course, us coming in as external facilitators who are trained on specifically the book sprints method from our team who has been doing this for decades. Of course, this is also a special skill set, I have to say this. We're always happy to consult, people who want to write books together and help them. We must mention we have a trademark on the term, just on the term itself. But of course, everyone should push facilitation of collaborative knowledge production. And then we have to just think about how we call it.
Could I comment on that?
Sure.
We've been through a torrid process of revising our copyright legislation, which was very, very much out of date. And it's been going on for a few years since soon after the process we conducted. And I would say what we did in Perth had an effect on the vigorousness with which this copyright legislation was thrown around and worked through and shared and built up over the process of 9 months to a year. So thank you for the expertise you fed into that. It's still being debated, it's still controversial, but that's Africa, baby. It was passed and then the president unpassed it.
Well, on that note.
it was very valuable when it came to the drafting. I think there were ideas that filtered in from you that were important.
Yeah. Thank you, Eve. Thank you everyone who participated in this webinar. I'm looking at the time, so we're about to close this. Any final questions, any final comments, anything that someone would still raise? Now is the time to speak up or leave a comment in the chat. Of course, we're always also behind, also there will be a recording that we will share. I will also add my email address in the chat. So everyone who would like to stay in touch, you can just add your email addresses in the chat, and we can also export, you know, the chat timeline for those who have been participating here. I just would like to thank everyone and congratulations to the authors for this really amazing also publishing process. As I said, we're on the sprint process, but then we're always amazed. We know how much effort community management takes and how much energy this is going in there. So thank you for that.
Thank you all. Good to see you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.